Yep.
Cool. All right, we are recording. This is the Kubernetes SIG Network meeting for Thursday, September 21st, 2017. We are coming up on the end of the 1.8 cycle, so I've moved all the 1.8 stuff on the agenda to the top.
All right, so 1.8 release is supposed to be next week, Wednesday. That got pushed back a little bit due to some of the test flakes, and also they wanted to ensure that upgrading worked correctly. And so that was one of the reasons it got pushed back. That decision, I think, was made last week, or maybe earlier this week in the release meetings. Anyway, so currently 1.8 release next Wednesday, but as we'll go through the list, we don't really have anything to do at this point. Is that also your understanding, Casey? And Tim?
So I know that I at least have an outstanding docs PR that I need to get in, but I'm not worried about that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we need to still pay attention to flakes or last-minute urgent things as they come through. I have done a little bit of triage on some of the issues that we have, and I've noticed, and these aren't necessarily 1.8 related, but I've noticed that there are a number of kubeadm issues coming in that seem to be multi-node related. So, I think maybe if people start trying the 1.8 release after it gets released, if there are some issues with the way that kubeadm actually configures things, then maybe we'll start getting a lot more issues about that. I don't think they're SIG Network related necessarily, but it might be flannel related with respect to how kubeadm does stuff. So anyway, it might be something to look out for in like the next 2 weeks or so if we start getting a flood of those types of issues.
Yeah. Is there one in particular that you think is interesting to look at now?
52783 is one of them, and there was another one that I got pointed to maybe a day or two ago that I forget which one that was. But yeah, I don't know if we have to necessarily go over it here, but obviously kubeadm or kubeadmin, however we're supposed to say it, is a thing that a lot of people use, and so we should probably try it out.
Yeah, so let's keep an eye out for that. I'll read through that issue and see if anything jumps out. But other than that, it sounds like we are all set for 1.8.
Yep.
I'm not tracking anything else.
Cool.
It's good for us. We'll see if we can get the rest of the release out.
Yeah. So the next thing on the list was from Daniel about KubeNet deprecation.
Right. So part of the KubeNet deprecation, we've been attacking it from moving. We have a lot of sort of workarounds built into the KubeNet for the bridge plugin from issues that have been seen over the years. Part of that deprecation was to put those workarounds into the CNI bridge plugin. But after working through that a little bit and getting a little bit of pushback from the CNI maintainers, I sort of agree with them, and I'm proposing instead that maybe we should think about point-to-point as the default plugin instead of bridge plugin, and that may move things along a little quicker.
Yeah, so since I was involved in some of that pushback, I think the only thing that we were thinking of there was that the EB tables packet duplication workaround because of the hairpin, because of the kernel panic from a long time ago. And so I spent some time last week. I set up a Debian box with the same kernel version that supposedly had that kernel panic. I was unable to reproduce it, but there were some other questionable things that I ran into that mean that I should try that again. But I also heard from I forget whether it's you, Tim, or somebody else at Google, that nobody is really using those Debian and Wheezy 3.16 kernels anymore. And so one of the things that the CNI maintainers had wanted was to know if somebody at Google could run those soak tests again on their clusters and see if we find that kernel hang on like the 4.4 kernels that I think are currently being used there.
I am 86% confident that we did test this against the COS base image. I don't know exactly which version of it. I don't know which kernel went with it, but it was a 4 something, and that the bug did still exist. I'm looking at Minhan to see if he remembers. The unregistered netdev. Do you remember what version of COS? Well, we did test it against COS, right? Do you remember?
With what?
Just to see if it hangs on the hairpin stuff.
I think it still hangs.
I'm pretty sure it does. We
Okay.
like, for completeness, we should just retest it. It shouldn't be that complicated to do. I don't know off the top of my head how to do it, but
Well, there were a number of reproducer cases that people who were not using Google infrastructure were doing. Kind of like there was a Docker stress test. There was also a Kube stress test.
we experienced, as soon as we ran it in that configuration on our soak test, within a couple of hours it triggered, right?
Okay.
So I have complete confidence that if it exists, we'll see it. We just have to go through and flip some flags on the soak test and get a soak run.
Okay. Yeah, if somebody could do that, that would be awesome, just to confirm that it still exists in 4.4. The point of me trying to reproduce it was to figure out if there was something, and then maybe I could start digging into the kernel issue and try to figure out where that reference counting was going wrong. But yeah, I wasn't able to reproduce it, and therefore.
I think the last reproduce I could remember is that we put it on for the node E2E test. And then the node E2E test run 8 times against 8 different OS images, and then it showed up immediately. Yeah, it showed up immediately. So yeah, I think I can try to find a way to see whether we can flip this on and see this problem.
Okay, so are you taking that action?
Yes.
All right, Minhan's on that one.
So back to deprecation then. I mean, from the CNI side, it was kind of a question of, if nobody sees this on relatively recent kernels, then maybe we'd like to not keep piling hacks on. But if we can reproduce it on relatively recent kernels, then yeah, maybe we either do need the bridge EB tables thing, or we need to go with something else like point-to-point.
So my feeling on this was, if we can do point-to-point without all those hacks and it's still functionally equivalent, and hell, jettison the hacks and let's go point-to-point.
Yeah, I mean,
I would rather not check them into CNI. I'd rather bury them under a rock.
Yep. Yeah, that's my feeling too. Daniel, were you able to do some testing with P2P and see if it fulfilled most of the requirements?
Yeah, I did. I did a soak test as well, because I think it wasn't clear whether bridge mode was actually the cause of the problem. I think we still saw this bug, correct? Even though
we still saw this bug.
We still saw this bug even turning on promiscuous mode, right?
The hang?
Yeah.
No, promiscuous mode made the bug go away completely.
Yeah, that fixes it. But then you have the issue.
I thought there was still like some cases where we would still see.
Very rare.
No. It was very, very highly correlated to turning on hairpin mode.
Okay.
You could run bridge without hairpin mode and it was fine, and you could run promiscuous mode and it was fine. But if you turned on bridge plus hairpin mode, it would fail in hours.
Yeah. So I mean, I did some testing. I put P2P in GCE Kubernetes cluster, and I did sort of the equivalent of our soak test that we have for the bridge plugin for KubeNet, and it looked pretty good. I think that it would work. I would test it obviously a lot more if we chose to go this route. But I wanted to sort of get consensus. But I guess if we can figure out if we still see this first, and then we can sort of go from there.
Off the top of your head, does P2P have? Does it support the service case that the hairpin mode was supposed to fix or supposed to allow?
Yeah, I tested that explicitly, and that looked fine to me.
I mean, at the end of the day, the P2P is the base for the Calico driver, right, Casey?
It's very similar. It's not the exact same plugin, but it sets up the vets and everything in a very similar fashion.
Yeah.
So I think we've got a pretty strong existence proof there, and if Daniel did the initial testing and it doesn't stink, I think we should press ahead with that and see if we could make that a change. We have to think through whether we want to make that just a silent sort of default switch in 1.9, or whether we make it an opt-in thing, or whether we alpha it or something like that. I don't know what guards we would want to put in place for that.
Okay.
And I'm open to hearing suggestions on what we would need for that. But do we think it's important enough to push in 1.9? 1.9 being a very short cycle, and we're focusing a lot here on stability and cleanup and debt pay down. I mean, in some sense,
that is kind of debt. That's a lot of debt.
But it's really debt pay down if we can delete it, and if we can't, then it's actually debt accruement, right?
Yes, exactly.
If 1.9 is short, why don't we alpha it in 1.9 and then try to delete it next one?
Yeah.
I could live with that.
And I think something very important is to get tests for it in, or at least make sure that we do a very good run of all the tests, because I mean the only reason to put it in alpha for 1.9 is to get people to start using it and report bugs. And if we can do a lot of that ourselves before 1.9 even, then maybe we'll be in a stronger position to switch it right after 1.9.
Okay, that sounds good. I think the tests we should have anyway.
So is that something you can fit in your Q4 call?
I don't see why not. Yes.
I can think of 100 reasons why not.
Really?
There are all the other things you have to do.
It feels like there's okay. Yeah. Okay. Let's.
We'll make it a stretch goal for Q4.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. So I got that down as a trial stretch goal for the 1.9 cycle. The next thing on the list, I think, was from you, Dan, about scheduling the next multi-network meeting.
Yep. Sorry, I just got to close my window so nobody hears airplanes. So yeah, Tim found a slot that works for him. So I'm just kind of throwing that out there. Does that slot listed in the agenda, which is Wednesday, September 27th at 9 a.m. U.S. Pacific time, does that work for other people or most people who are interested in the multi-network conversation? The goal of this next meeting would be to discuss all of the proposals and discussions around services and multi-network and the impact on the Kube API for services. So, and if nobody objects in this call right now, I'm still going to send out a mail to the SIGNet list proposing this time. And if people respond positively, then I'll just schedule it and we'll do it then. So heads up.
Thanks.
All right, that's it for that.
And the last thing was something I added to talk about 1.9 planning. It sounds like it's going to be a short cycle. I was going to suggest that we dedicate some time to agreeing as a group what things we're going to try to tackle in that time frame. So can I suggest that maybe we start with a kind of brain dump doc of things that we think are good to address in 1.9, and then we translate that into our kind of feature spreadsheet as a group during our next meeting.
Okay. Do you want to brain dump here, or you want to brain dump offline into a shared sheet or something?
I was imagining a shared sheet, but we could get started here if there are no other topics and people are interested in hanging around.
I did just add a quick topic, which is host ports, and I was curious on the state of host ports in the CNI driver. We had talked I think long ago, and I probably missed the end conclusion here about kind of having that split between the runtime and the actual network plugin itself, where the runtime would do the port reservation on the host, but the plugin would actually do all the IP tables stuff. And currently, CNI, I don't think does anything around that, but it still pushes the host ports out to the network plugin. And I think that happened when the 0.3 spec update happened for CNI. So I was wondering if the runtime does the port reservations is still the plan of record, and therefore if we need to update the CNI driver to do some of that.
My feeling is that the CNI driver really should be doing it. It's really a completeness thing.
Well, also for the record, the other runtimes are a little bit mixed here. The cryo runtime, for example, does all the port stuff internally itself without regard to whether CNI plugins want to handle the ports themselves. So that's something that I'm going to go fix in cryo. I'm not sure what other runtimes do there. But it's a little bit confused right now, and so I feel like we probably need to bring some sanity to it for the 1.9 timeframe.
Right. So, I mean, my strong feeling is that if the runtime does anything network related, it's probably broken because it can't possibly know what plugins you want to use and how those plugins are going to work. And I mean, especially now that Cube is far enough along that people are doing really creative stuff with it. I'm seeing more people talk about different plugins that just won't work with simple things, and they're going to have their network plugins do it. With simple implementations of host ports, it won't work.
Yeah. Okay. So, sorry. Go ahead.
So then that leaves the last part, which is like, do we need, like capital N need, to reserve those ports by actually opening them? No, we don't need to. I think it's polite. It's a way of preventing people from shooting themselves in the feet. And if we're going to do that, I think it should probably be the plugin's problem to do that.
Okay. I mean, I think the only downside to that is that if you're going to use simple CNI plugins, like for example, in the if we do spin KubeNet out into a CNI config list, nobody would do those port reservations, or we'd have to create some kind of plugin for CNI that you'd put into the config list, or enhance the CNI port map plugin to like fork off some kind of daemon and then communicate with RPC to do those port reservations, or just do no port reservations at all.
And this is exactly why we haven't pushed real hard on doing it in the CNI plugins, right?
Yeah.
But that sort of opens the door to a different question, which is, how happy are we? I'm going to try to phrase this as delicately as I can. How happy are we overall with CNI as it currently stands? And would we be open to looking at changes that would make those sorts of things easier, potentially at the cost of making CNI more complicated? So
I don't understand the question.
Without being cagey, the storage plugin team has been working on a specification for better storage plugins. And after careful examination of all the problems that the current storage plugins have, they decided that it made a lot more sense to do an active plugin, a plugin that actually is alive all the time and takes an RPC call over gRPC and responds to that as a way of doing the storage mounts and attachments. There's 100 reasons why it's better and probably 5 why it's worse. The question, I guess, is, and also at the same time, we have people working on device plugins, which is, stuff like GPUs and those sorts of things.
Well, and NICs, unfortunately.
Well, yes, and so we have to, you jumped the gun there.
I did.
But you stole my thunder, Dan.
Sorry.
So the device plugins design is heading in the same direction as the storage design, because the storage design seems pretty well bought into, and I think it's pretty well worked through. So that leaves the networking as an outlier. Interestingly, a lot of these device plugins, like GPUs in particular, are simultaneously device plugins and network plugins. And it would be really nice if NVIDIA, for example, could ship one driver that was one daemon set that you ran on your cluster, and that daemon set satisfied both the networking interface and the device interface. And we've even heard talk of things that want to satisfy networking and storage at the same time. And so the question I guess I put forth to the group without expecting an answer here, but start to let it percolate is, what would we think if we proposed that CNI move to an active daemon model more like that?
To be fair, we have discussed that in the CNI maintainer meetings,
okay.
And not come to any specific conclusion because I think at this point we didn't have any particular need. The only use case that we had up until now was Windows, where it's a lot more expensive to fork processes or start new processes. And so Windows people wanted us to just have kind of like an RPC interface that they could tunnel that stuff over. So, I mean, we can continue to bring it up in the meetings and start talking about it a little bit more.
I mean, it might be worthwhile to try to, well, I wanted to float it first to see what CNI people thought about it. The fact that you've discussed it already is great. We can start to come up with a list of reasons why this might make sense.
Well, here's another one for you, Tim. If we ever in the future expect pods to be able to update their network information asynchronously, that is another good use case to have some kind of daemon running, or an RPC interface with a long-lived process. We've also talked quite a bit. Yes.
Dan, can I ask for clarification of what that scenario is?
Yeah. So basically, think about cases where you have DHCP or IPv6 Slack addressing for a pod. Either of those mechanisms can change the address assigned to a pod at will without Kube being able to know about it currently. IPv6 routing, you can just get a completely new router advertisement with a completely different prefix or different options. DHCP, same thing on a renew. And currently there's no way to translate or to send those options back to Kubernetes. Now I know Kube does not currently expect the networking setup of a pod to change while that pod is running, but it's just something that we've sort of been discussing in the CNI meetings in combination with the GET call that we're probably going to land in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, thank you.
So it's just, I mean, I don't know if Kube will ever go to a model where pod IP details can change, but if we do, then having some kind of RPC interface would be a lot more useful, because then we could actually do it without polling.
Yeah, right. That was really my question, I guess. Well, the next question is this kind of a backdoor into a discussion of what dynamicity Kube would want or not? It sounds like maybe not.
I'm not sure I understand your question, Mike.
Was Dan saying that there is discussion about Kubernetes changing to a more dynamic network configuration model, so that the configuration of a pod can change over time in Kubernetes?
Not that I know of. Maybe Tim can clarify there.
Nobody's ever asked me for that. It doesn't, like, DHCP seems like a pretty obvious extension, but nobody's ever came in and said, I can't use this unless you support DHCP.
All right, thank you. So I'll just put my toe in the waters. I think actually I've heard something like that, in addition to being someone who's doing something like that. I think I'm not the only person here who's talking about building infrastructure as a service type of cloud using Kubernetes technology. And in that world, the configuration of your compute units does tend to be more dynamic.
Yeah, we've considered here how we could reduce the impact of the per node IP block allocation model that we use today, which is very, let's just say, not thrifty with IP space. Something more dynamic would certainly be interesting.
I think so if we're gonna do this kind of dynamic allocation stuff, I think CRI has also need to evolve.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, to include this, or the other way around is that we keep CNI as simple as possible, and then and then just use that as the building block to evolve CRI. I'm just floating the ideas.
Sure. I think we've got a bunch of potential options here. One of the big things that I like about a more active daemon-based model is the discovery of it is easier, and the installation of a driver is easier. It is more heavyweight, so it's got some pros and it's got some cons. All right, we'll table that for another discussion when we've got a bit more gravity behind actually doing something there. I don't think it's on anybody's near-term plans.
We probably should start the discussion on the mailing list, I think.
That's fair. That's fair. Who wants to start the conversation? All right. Daniel's laughing because he's chomping at the bit to do this.
I'll also bring it up in the maintainer meetings for CNI next time, although next week it might not happen because there's some people who are out on vacation.
Okay. Yeah, cool. Thank you. Please let us know if there's big concerns there. Maybe we'll have a joint meeting sometime.
Sure. To loop it back to host ports and the immediate term, were you saying, Tim, that the runtime should just punt everything to the plugin? I think that's what you said, including port reservation.
That is my desire. I don't think the plugins and the infrastructure we've got around plugins is really well suited for that right now. Given the exec nature of CNI, like having it exec a process that's only job was to hold a port open would be a start, but we still have to deal with what happens when that process dies and who pays for that process's resources. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, so the original, I was sort of working on the CNI side of host ports originally. I never got as far as Casey Calandrella did, but I was originally going to kind of follow the model of the DHCP plugin for CNI, where it actually would fork off a long-lived daemon that would handle port reservations or whatever for every pod on the system linked to that plugin. Maybe that's a model we could do.
We could do, I think if we're going to consider a CNI change, I'd rather consider that first. This isn't killing anybody. Again, nobody's ever called me to yell at me for not opening a port. And in fact, Kubelet does it today, but it does it in a buggy way anyway. So it's only half working even in Kubernetes. I think it's icing on the cake. It's not the cake itself.
Okay. All right, that's it for host ports. So back to Casey for 1.9 cycle.
Yes.
I have something for 1.9.
Awesome.
I can think of a few things too.
Okay. So something I'll throw out here that came up in discussions on some other email threads, and I apologize if I don't loop all the threads together. Ingress has sort of languished in beta for quite a long time. There's a couple of known issues with the specification of Ingress that we could probably address to make it somewhat more portable. And then there's a very big open question about the plethora of annotations that almost everybody ends up using when they use Ingress. So we proposed, I guess SIG Network has a meeting at KubeCon. We're going to have a room or something there. It was proposed to perhaps have an Ingress design summit between now and then to work out what we think is our proposal. This group has mostly focused on the lower level of things, but I'd like to say here that I'm going to try to organize an Ingress get-together sometime in early Q4, mid Q4, before KubeCon, so that we can get to KubeCon with a, say concrete, but a Jello proposal. So anybody who's interested in attending that, you should maybe drop me a note or something and let me know, and I will try to get on the organizing of this soon. That's all I have.
I was just going to say that, continued IPv6 work, since that seems to have some effort behind it and seems to be proceeding. And KubeNet deprecation were two that I wanted to add that come to my head immediately.
There's also core DNS as a potential replacement for kubedns. So that proposal went in today, yesterday, sometime.
Okay.
Should take a look at that.
There's also work around IPVS kube proxy that I'm sure we'll want to try to push forward in 1.9. I'm a little concerned that 1.9 is maybe too short to push that forward, considering how much work has to be done there over the cycle, but I'm open to suggestions.
Are you talking about the cleanups that there's like an issue open with some further things to do?
They have a lot of further things to do.
Yeah,
I don't know if anybody from that team is here on the call today, but basically they snapshotted the IP tables proxy like at the very beginning of a major overhaul, and so they have to sort of backport all of those PRs that Wojtek and I threw together. That's going to be a bit of a challenge, and then they had a bunch of to-do items anyway. I wonder if the short nature of the 1.9 cycle might prohibit them from trying to go beta.
This is Michael. I'm from Huawei. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
Yeah, so we have a list of to-do list. And maybe what we need to do is to scope out what we want to, or what we can do in 1.9. So if you guys can give me the list of things that you think we have to have, then I'll put those as high priorities to let my team to implement. Maybe the code, the code sync is one thing. Like IP tables logic and IPVS logic, there's some of IPVS current code is a little bit outdated, right? Was snapshot from that. Less one work. And anything else in your mind?
I thought there were a bunch of to-dos left in the Proxier code when I reviewed it, but maybe that was from an earlier draft. Maybe I'm misremembering.
Okay, that's fine. Let me do this. When I come off this meeting, I'll come up with a list for you guys to review, and I will have priorities in that, and we'll just go from the top to bottom, see how far we can go.
Okay, I think I can live with that.
Yeah, okay.
I was also going to mention the Windows work. I know there's like a Windows PR for Kube proxy that I took a look at last week and haven't looked at since then. I don't know if some of that would hit by the 1.9 cycle, but I'll bet they probably want more review and stuff like that on those PRs so they can get them in rather than later. And also they apparently wrote a CNI driver for Windows as well. All right, not driver, CNI plugin for Windows as well.
Yeah, they were very busy very late in the cycle.
Yep.
Is the Windows CNI driver released?
I don't know if it was. Last I knew, it wasn't anywhere. I asked them to put up a PR or a pointer to GitHub to it, and I haven't looked at any of the mails last week about it. So, but I expect it will be soon.
Okay. And is that the only thing that need to do? Like, how does kube proxy works on Windows? Is that also resolved?
Yeah,
they have a new proxy, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So there's two modes. There's like the old way, and then like the new way, I think is called kernel mode for kube proxy, and kernel mode uses some of the Windows kernels, like IP tables equivalent type stuff to do the thing instead of the old way that they were doing it. So, yeah, it's all new.
That's great to know. Yeah, once this is ready, I'll be very interested to test it. I mean,
I'm sure they'd love that. I think most of the Windows issues have like a Windows label. I could be wrong on that, but if you're interested, search for that.
Yeah. Okay.
What else?
Ingress is the big one that was on my mind. There's also, I'm not sure how much work is here to do, but moving the new network policy stuff we just did from beta to GA. It might just be a documentation thing, or maybe we'll find changes we want to make.
I hesitate to say multiple pod IPs at this point because we're not sure how that might be affected by multi-network if that ever happens. But maybe we should start pushing that forward, especially with the IPv6 work for stack pods.
Okay. What else?
Hey, Tim, do you know if the resource management stuff and device plugins were targeted for 1.9?
I do not know off the top of my head what their timing is.
Okay.
The API should be there for 1.8. I think most of the bits should be there in an alpha form.
Oh, look who's on the ball. Okay, what else do we have?
Something we had talked about for 1.8, myself included, and kind of failed to do was do something about our issue backlog.
Yeah, probably this is more appropriate for next meeting, but had some discussion where I know it would be good for the SIG to come up with some roles, for example, like a triager that rotates among members of the SIG. I think Chris has been doing an amazing job looking at all the issues, but it probably should be distributed in some way.
I mean, unless you want to keep doing it.
Yeah, I just don't want someone to get overloaded because it's really the SIG's responsibility.
Yeah.
I think it would be good to get a rotation, and people also would get more involved in all the wide,
Yes,
different kinds of bugs.
I think great. And similarly, I still encourage everybody to get involved in code reviews. Like some of the bigger code reviews, just because they get assigned to me or to Daniel or to Casey or Dan, doesn't mean that we can't use more eyes on them. So anybody here who's looking for more technical, concrete ways to participate, those code reviews, man, many eyes make shallow bugs. All right. What else? Anything left? Should give people 15 minutes back.
Yeah, let's do it. I will write up all those ideas and circulate them around, and people can add to it if anything else jumps out at them over the next 2 weeks.
All right.
Sounds good.
Hopefully the next time we talk, 1.8 will be cut. Oh, no, we won't if we have the meeting on Wednesday. Oh, well. Next time.
Yep. Cool.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.